We house murderers, armed robbers, rapists.
Well, who they think they're kidding? Everybody knows I'm the champ.
Now, the heavyweight champion from the...
When George talked about his hopes in prison, two inmates named Repstein and Campos appeared. Repstein, a mob leader, found George interesting because he was a famous boxer. Repstein warned George about another skilled boxer in prison who could beat him, which made George upset. He got ready to confront Repstein, but Campos stepped in to calm him down, explaining that his boss didn't mean any harm. Campos then told George about the undefeated champion, Monroe Hutchin, known as the Undisputed in the prison cafeteria. George tried to learn more about Monroe Hutchin by asking other prisoners. Eventually, he met Monroe and tried to provoke him, but Monroe stayed calm. Feeling ignored, George slapped Monroe to get a reaction. As expected, Monroe reacted and a fight almost broke out before the guards intervened in time. George was taken to the warden's office where he was warned to behave well in Sweetwater. George ignored advice and asked for special treatment as a world boxing champion, suggesting he could make the prison famous. Meanwhile, Monroe faced punishment in solitary confinement. The next day, George inquired about Mango's crime, but Mango warned him about upsetting others. Despite warnings, George persisted, asking Ratbag about his crime. Ratbag initially ignored him, but eventually hit George after feeling insulted. In retaliation, George knocked Ratbag down, proclaiming himself the true prison champion. George's attitude alienated many inmates, including Willard, who advised him to be nicer. Ignoring the advice, George ended up fighting Willard without intervention from the guards. Despite the fight going unnoticed by the guards, Monroe discussed a plan with Officer Darlin to transfer him to another prison. Reflecting on his past successes as a boxer, Monroe remained unfazed by the transfer, knowing he would still be incarcerated regardless. Monroe's boxing career took a hit when he discovered his wife cheating and ended up killing the man involved, resulting in a life sentence in prison. In another scene, George fought with an inmate named Eddie Jones, defeating him and his gang easily. This caught the attention of the warden. Lipscomb, upset with George's recent troublemaking, confronted him for putting 5 prisoners in intensive care. Sensing resentment towards George among the inmates, Repstein saw an opportunity for a match between humble Monroe and the Undisputed. Hutchin and the arrogant George, the Iceman Chambers, Repstein asked Campos to get everything ready and coordinate with their criminal group to organize betting events outside the prison. However, Repstein faced resistance from Warden Lipham, who was hesitant to approve the fight. Repstein tried to convince the warden to agree, but when gentle persuasion didn't work, Repstein had to threaten Lipham. Finally, the warden had to give in to Repstein's demand. However, there were conditions. The fight had to happen while Lipham was on vacation, and he didn't want to be involved in any illegal activities. Lipham also made it clear that no one could record or publicize the fight, and everything had to return to normal when he got back from vacation. Repstein accepted all these conditions, and they came to an agreement. The story shifts to George meeting with a man named Lewis. George said he'd be set free from prison if he beat Monroe Hutchin, but Lewis warned him that Monroe was a heavyweight boxer who had never lost a fight. George didn't seem bothered by this because he believed Monroe's boxing career ended 10 years ago when he was in prison for murder. George was still arrogant and thought he was way better than Monroe. Monroe cautioned George to be careful when facing Monroe because, in his opinion, Monroe hadn't fully shown his boxing skills when he was a pro. George misunderstood and thought Lewis was underestimating him, so he got upset. Meanwhile, Repstein was negotiating with Monroe about the fight. Repstein offered Monroe a 30% cut of the profits if he won. However, Monroe asked for 40% because he needed to support his sister and her 3 kids, as she was on her own without a husband or a steady job. After striking a deal with Monroe, Repstein approached George and informed him that Monroe is all set to fight him. George is thrilled because he sees this as his chance to demonstrate his skills and prove that he's the true champion both inside and outside the prison. In the days leading up to the match, both Monroe and George are seen training intensely to get ready for the fight. On one occasion, George approaches Monroe again, trying to provoke him by claiming that he will emerge victorious and become the greatest champion ever to defeat him. But this time, Monroe wasn't bothered. Instead, he responded to George's words in such a way that George got annoyed and decided to leave. After that, the other inmates, who were fed up with George's arrogance, tried to annoy him by making noise with their trays, causing a disturbance. Some prisoners even stood up and tried to gang up on him. However, guards quickly stepped in to stop George and prevent the chaos from getting worse. Meanwhile, Campos felt pressure from his criminal group outside the prison, who wanted Repstein and Campos to ensure that George won the fight because many people had bet on him. However, Campos firmly refused because Repstein, being a lifelong boxing enthusiast, wanted the match to be fair. Moreover, Monroe wouldn't agree to throw the fight even if it offered a lot of money. Meanwhile, both Monroe and George seemed to be increasing their training for the upcoming match, which was approaching quickly. Later on, Andy Jones and some other prisoners who had suffered greatly because of George approached Monroe, offering to help ensure his victory. They seemed to be planning to poison George before the fight. However, Monroe tactfully turned down Eddie Jones and the others' offer. Monroe acknowledged that he might not be the toughest person, but he wasn't afraid, and he was ready to face George in a fair fight. The night of the match finally arrived, and everyone was excited because they had been eagerly waiting for the biggest fight between the world boxing champ George, the Iceman Chambers, and the undefeated champion of Sweetwater, Monroe, the Undisputed Hutchin. The match was watched by the prisoners and several mob bosses who had turned it into a big betting event. Monroe and George warmed up before entering the arena, which had been set up for the fight. In the beginning of the fight, George kept attacking Monroe and even knocked him down towards the end of the first round. Despite the audience shouting insults at him, George felt confident. Meanwhile, Monroe recovered and got ready for the second round. In this round, Monroe fought back and did better than George for a while. However, George soon got control back and launched more attacks, ultimately knocking Monroe down again by the end of the second round. George felt even more sure of himself after knocking Monroe down for the second time. He aggravated the audience by responding with harsh words to their insults. Meanwhile, Monroe seemed to struggle to recover from George's constant attacks in the first two rounds. However, Monroe was determined to win the match to help his sister, who was having money problems. So, he quickly got back on his feet as the third round began. Monroe launched more attacks and found a chance to block George's attacks and deliver a powerful hit. Indeed, Monroe successfully pushed George back and landed a strong hit before George could notice the gap in his defense. Feeling trapped by Monroe's relentless assault, which was hard to defend against and amid constant ridicule from the audience, George became enraged and launched. In a furious counterattack fueled by anger, George's attacks became unpredictable, allowing Monroe to easily predict his moves. Monroe then tried to control the pace of the match by focusing on defense and making George angrier. Surprisingly, this tactic worked, and George continued to attack Monroe even after the third round had ended. This prompted his manager to step in before George risked disqualification. In the last round, Monroe managed to outperform George in every attack. He landed a powerful punch in George's face, knocking him down and winning the fight, defending his title as the Undisputed Champion. Later, Campos revealed that Repstein had passed away 3 hours after the match. However, before Repstein died, he had arranged for $2 million to be given to Monroe if he won the fight as per their agreement. On the flip side, George Chambers was released from prison and Monroe finally accepted the money to help his sister, who was facing financial difficulties. Moreover, George Chambers and his manager denied that the fight with Monroe ever happened. A few months later, George the Iceman Chambers regained the World Heavyweight Championship. All the inmates at Sweetwater watched the match on TV. However, they later laughed and cheered for Monroe Hutchin upon learning that George Chambers was crowned the Undisputed World Heavyweight Champion. Because according to them, the true Undisputed Champion was Monroe Hutchin. So, the moral of the story is, if you're going to brag, make sure you can back it up. Otherwise, you might end up with a bruised ego and a sore face like George. And remember, even if you're not the champ in the ring, you can still be the champ in life, or at least in the cafeteria. So, which movie should we pick up next? Do let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Until next time, see you all.